Welcome to the show today. My name is Douglas Gabriel. I'm here with my best friend and editor, John Barnwell, to talk about a new book that we have just finished. How are you, John?
I'm doing great. And this is, as you know, a topic dear to our hearts. I mean, we've spent the last 45 years or so trying to figure out the meaning of Christ. And what does it mean to be a Christophorus? St. Christopher, the image of St. Christopher that was in the cathedrals all over France, but of course the French Revolution busted them up, a lot of them. But there's still some that are available, and it shows St. Christopher carrying the child across the river. And it's that whole idea. Christophorus means bearer of Christ. And so I'd like to think that what we're trying to do here is give people a clear understanding of what that could possibly mean.
And that is the most difficult task there is. My entire life, I've spent studying religion. And as many of you know, I have a PhD in comparative religions and another one in philosophy. And I can tell you that until Rudolf Steiner came along in my life, I did not understand Christology. For instance, you can look at the two different lineages of Jesus in Matthew and in Luke in the Gospels. They're completely different. You hear the stories of the birth of Christ, of the birth of Jesus. Two different stories. You got four Gospels that were supposedly eyewitness accounts that disagree on so many points that it's unbelievable. And then you have, literally, I looked this up, there are hundreds of thousands of books upon theories, speculations, extrapolations on who Jesus of Nazareth was. And then that doesn't even get into Christ and the Trinity and the God. And Steiner wrote 350 books. And throughout all of it, the most common theme is his cosmic Christian cosmology. And that's what we're trying to describe in this book.
Yeah, and really, if you look at what you're describing, this discrepancy, actually nobody really has done better than the Emperor Julian when he wrote his Arguments Against the Christians that Thomas Taylor translated. I gave Tyler a copy of that some time ago from a collection of books. They were in cases, but they were all water damaged. But there had been in a basement, most of the printing was burned, and there was a few left in the basement, and my friend Donald Weiser found them, bought them all, and I used to get these sets from him. I gave one to Werner Glass, but it's two volumes, and one of the volumes is Arguments Against Christians, and he brings up a lot of these points. And it wasn't until Rudolf Steiner that all those discrepancies were clarified.
And we do that in this book. As a matter of fact, there are numerous topics in this book called The Second Coming of Christ in the Etheric Realm. This is the book, and it's a beautiful picture of a friend of mine, Chuck Andrade, that painted that. It's just gorgeous. But in this book, there had to be, as I decided, a number of themes all brought together. And so I just have to make the apology that there's no way that myself or anyone else could possibly do justice to what Steiner gives as his Christian cosmology, which is found throughout his 350 books. And it is a theme that myself, a person who had studied these things literally quite seriously, and never came to understand the discrepancies, never came to understand what the mystery language was that Christ was speaking to his apostles. As a matter of fact, he told them that I'm speaking a language to you that I don't speak to the common people or to the other disciples. It's a secret language. And what this secret language did is it communicated to them the higher principles of what Christ was about, what Steiner calls the wisdom of Christ or the Sophia of Christ. And he says that's what's needed in our time. But this is an incredibly complicated topic, and there's no way that anyone can possibly do it justice. Look what it took Rudolf Steiner in terms of his efforts to describe these things. Now, let's remember, and I may go a bit of far afield for some, but I know that a lot of people who follow our talks are anthroposophists, and they know these things. So Rudolf Steiner was considered by many, and himself, to be the reincarnation of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. Well, Thomas Aquinas was considered to be not only a saint, but he was in direct contact with the angelic world. He would levitate when he said Mass, and Reginald of Pepperno would have to grab him by the feet and try to pull him down to the ground. So finally, the Pope said, no, you can't say Mass anymore, ever again, because you are disturbing everybody. Everybody wants to come see you levitate. And then he would take hours to do the Holy Communion, the Holy Eucharist, because he was a saint. Okay, his philosophy and his theology was considered the true doctrine of the Catholic Church at his time. Now, this guy, St. Thomas Aquinas, in a reincarnation of Aristotle, who laid out the 10 categories, the 10 categories are still used today if you wish to define anything in the material world. And what are the 10 categories? As Steiner points out, they're the same as the 10 ranks of the hierarchy, and we're the 10th rank. So you have the hierarchy of love, of harmony, of willpower, of wisdom, of motion, of form, and then the archai, archangels, and archai. If you don't know that, and that's going to come out in one of our new books called Cosmic Intelligence and the Spiritual Hierarchies, if you don't understand that, then you can't understand yourself, because you are a replication of that. You are built upon the same template that this being who was an avatar, higher than an avatar, Christ only incarnated once, and he came down from the realm of the Trinity, and he worked specifically in the realm of the Elohim, the spirits of form, which are above the lower ranks of angels, archangels, archai, than the form Elohim, or a lot of different names for it, but that's where Christ worked to create the template of the human being. So in this book, I attempt to do what Steiner said someone should do, which is really stupid, because no one can do it justice. Because no matter what you do, even if you turned into an angel right now, most of it you wouldn't have really deserved. That's the grace of God. That's the mercy of God. That's the love of God. That's really not you. When you get yourself out of the way and you become selfless, then these things happen through you, but technically they're not you. So when you go into the higher realms, the angels, archangels, archai, you're going into the future. And when you go down below your heart into the astral body, etheric body, and physical body, that's really the gifts of the past. And who gave the most gifts? The person, the being who gave us our ego, our I am, our awareness, our consciousness. And that was Christ. And that was a template that Christ made on the sun in the realm of the Elohim, the exousiai, the beings of form. And when that was created, at the same time, let's just use Adam. Adam was created, but at the same time, an exact etheric replica was created that was kept in that realm where the template and where that first, what Steiner calls the sister soul of Adam. And you have to know these things, or else you can't get to the biography of Christ. He says someone needs to do the biography of Christ. Well, that's what we're trying to do. But to do it is going to take, basically, it will take about 10 books, like the ones that we're producing, to be able to address all these things in detail. But in this one book, The Second Coming of Christ in the Etheric Realm, it gives you a picture of all of those different aspects. That those will be the aspects of the pre-earthly deeds of Christ, which are the things that happened when Christ left the realm of the Elohim and came down through the archai, archangel, angel, and then finally to the human realm. Those are deeds of Christ. And without understanding that, you don't understand his deed, which was the birth, life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Christ, which we will call here today, and Steiner calls the mystery of Golgotha. So when we say the mystery of Golgotha, that was the fourth deed of Christ. But Christ has never left us. He's given us his word that he would not leave us. And his development is directly related to our development. So we have lower development in the astral, etheric, and physical, and we have higher development in the three soul spirit realms that are above us. And all of that is part of the divine plan. Now, that's just, that is the most pathetic nutshell of what we're trying to talk about here. But that's what we're going to try to address, which is incredibly difficult, by the way. And I'm glad we have 2 videos to discuss this topic.
I couldn't have said it any better. I mean, the daunting task of spending the time to be able to sort through a sufficient number of the works of Rudolf Steiner to gain kind of a panopticon, a panoramic view, when there's some 6,586 plus lectures and then over 50 published books and articles, and it takes up 36 and a half feet of shelf space. And geez, I only have 15 feet of it. You know, it's like, give me a break. I'm not going to be able to figure all this out, but I'm going to give it my best try. And so that's what we can do. And don't feel that this is required. This is for those souls that have a special calling to understand these things. And Rudolf Steiner was very clear that one could come to a resolution as a spirit of freedom of love just through your good intentions. So it's not a question of, do you belong to a church? Is this going to be on the test? There's all these wonderful challenges. And to be perfectly honest, it would be difficult to be down here without the works of Rudolf Steiner for myself, because I just have to step back and think, what would I have done? I mean, I probably would have been studying Vedanta or something like that, which I did anyways, or Kabbalah, or there's a great many traditions. And in fact, I attempt to show how they mirror each other in my works. But in this particular book, what we've done is we've kind of given you an outline or a roadmap of where to look to find out certain facets of the Christ mystery. And it's fully referenced. It gives the GA number rather than the CW, which is collected works in English. But the GA is the Gesamtes Gabe, and that's the German collected edition. And but it gives the name of the lecture, the book it's in, and the date, and the city it was given in. So you should be able to go to the Rudolf Steiner archive and look any of these things up, or go to any of the book concerns, and you can use that title and or at least the GA or collected works number and find that relevant text. But I wish I had this. You know, I can remember what we were talking earlier, and I said to them, yeah, you know, our mentors, I'd ask them a question and they'd just look at me. And so I had to go find it out by myself, which is probably a good thing, you know. And so it's a fascinating thing. So we have the kind of the gumption, shall we say, and Douglas is from Missouri. We'll call it gumption, to have the audacity to attempt to try and bring some kind of synthesis and summation of the works of Rudolf Steiner.
So well said, John. And what's to reiterate what you just said and underscore that, there are 2 ways that Steiner says people generally come to the experience of Christ. One is by simply having the experience of the Holy Grail, where you see a Eucharist or you see some type of ritual where there's bread and wine or grape juice, and all of a sudden, boom, bang, you're there. You have the full-on experience, and that's what you have to have with Christ. You have to have an experience with Christ. It can't be in your head. But then there's the other group. That's the group that both of us, actually, I'm on that group that just, you know, looks at the Eucharist and I see angels. I mean, I don't know why anybody else didn't. I thought they all did. And so he literally says, you can have this experience of Christ right now. Literally, it's in the book, and it's in another book I'm working on too, where he says, one look at the Holy Eucharist, whether you're a Catholic, Christian, doesn't matter. You see that chalice and the host, and it's, you know, the dove coming down, and all of a sudden, boom, bang, You have an angelic experience which shows you through the astral light Christ appearing in the etheric realm, which is called the second coming. And we're going to have to go gently into the words second coming here in a minute.
Yes, just to share again a short episode I've shared before, but it's so relevant to what we're discussing. When I would go to the Christian community, and the bus would drive up with the children from the Camp Hill centers, which is homes that were established by Karl Koenig and Carlo Pietzner and others for the challenged souls, we'll call them. And they would show up and they would sit in the back, and they'd all be back there, and some would be moving around, some would just be staring at the ceiling or making all manner of gyrations. But once the service got to the Eucharist, they were all just sitting there looking in awe.
Yes, some of those children, I worked at those centers, and I was not only were those some of the people I worked with all the time, I was also a server in the Christian community. So I was there, I witnessed this, and I also witnessed the fact that children were brought in for the children's service, and they're all over the place. But when it came down to this service, they had an experience, okay? It doesn't matter whether your mind is clear and works well. That doesn't have anything to do with meeting Christ. And so that's the part of me that it was kind of on that side. Then there's the other side, the cosmologist, Steiner calls them. Well, those people, I was going to call them a name, but that would refer to us. Those people who are really in their heads, they want to know in absolute detail questions that no one could ever even imagine in Steiner's day. And so they didn't ask him, so he didn't explain certain things. Why? Because he was giving everything that could be handled at the time. But if you go back and you read his work over and over and over again, after about 40, 50 years, you start to say, oh, I understand what he's saying now, because you have to put it in perspective, who he was saying it to. So his cosmology, and as far as I know, to be quite literally exact about this, as far as I know, these books we're producing are the only place you can find this anywhere. You will not find the Christian community talking about the aspect of Steiner's second coming, Steiner referred to as the second coming of Christ in the etheric, as the realm of spiritual economy. You will never hear that in a Christian community, which Steiner inspired them by helping them renew the 7 sacraments. So there's a certain religious side to Steiner, but he was never a priest and he was never ordained with them. And he left it up to these brilliant priests who came to him and said, can you help us renew the 7 sacraments? And he did. But anyway, you can see that it's effective there, right? But that you'll never, ever hear them refer to the realm of spiritual economy. Not once. I was as deep as you can get into the Christian community, it's called, without being a priest in that particular church. Or what Steiner called it, Christian renewal. So he didn't want to really just have a church. He wanted to have every single one of these priests doing the spiritual work so that the congregation could see them going through their spiritual advancement right in front of them. That's what this is all about. Christ created a template for all human beings. I'm calling it in this book. And this is, talk about audacious and being from the Ozarks. Yeah, I literally call it the great I am. I call Christ the great I am. And I call us the small I am. Just to put it in perspective, because there's nothing we do that's fantastic that didn't come directly from either our previous group soul, unconscious or collective unconscious, or the activity of anthroposophia, the being of Sophia, that is the evolving humanity, or the gifts of Christ. So if you don't talk about the 7 deeds of Christ, and you won't find an anthroposophic book that I know of, except maybe T.H. Meyer might have mentioned it in the book, you won't find anyone but us talking about the 7 deeds of Christ. You won't find anyone talking about what did Steiner call them? The expansion of the concept of reincarnation to include what's called the adoption or the imprinting or the weaving into your own etheric or astral body, the perfected body of Christ that's in the realm of spiritual economy. No one will ever tell you that except Steiner. And there's a reason for that. And no one will tell you about the missing years of Christ accurately. Steiner does in his fifth gospel. No one will tell you that Christ is now the Lord of karma. So he stands there not only as the guardian of the threshold that you must meet every single night. So if you want to meet Christ every night, try to get morally correct with everything in your thinking, feeling, and willing before you go to sleep. That's meeting Christ every night. And then your dreams, you can actually go into this realm of spiritual economy, which is also called Shamballa. It's also called the super etheric. There's 20 names for this that Steiner gives. But you can't find more than 10 anthroposophists in the world that would be able to discuss these different specific aspects in detail through the cosmology, the Christian cosmology of Steiner on the face of the earth, because it's so complicated. It's so complicated. Most people just completely give up. How could they possibly read and hold in their mind without making any judgment 358 books, hold them in your mind, don't make any judgments, and then see what picture that gives you. That's what you have to do. And this is almost impossible to do. So we have attempted it, and we've given it our best bet, but we ask for forgiveness because, again, one of the great gifts of Christ is memory. But take that to its logical conclusion. If Christ is the Lord of karma and gave us memory, then he gave us the ability to reincarnate. And he conquered death. So if you got the true message of the gospel, then you know that you don't die, you're immortal, as long as you are moral. And basically, you can literally take on the bodies, the perfected bodies that are being stored in the realm of spiritual economy, where they are multiplied like a seed into endless exact copies. But then the description of this, which is in this book, at the end of the book, the description of it is so profound that it's mind-boggling. Literally, it's probably taken me 40 years of meditating on this to just recently say, oh, now so many things become much clearer. So now I've gone back and I've looked at all the people that Rudolf Steiner specifically pointed out had the perfected vehicles of Christ and looked at their words. Well, I'd always loved all of these writers and these saints and these wonderful people, but and also art. He refers to the fact that artists and sculptors and musicians can get, even sometimes for a little while, and barely be conscious of it, they start to embody an aspect of Christ, which shows that from the moment that Christ created the template, which is him, he's the greater I am, and he created this template of the smaller I am, after the Garden of Eden, when a perfect copy of each of us is still left in the spiritual world. So a clairvoyant like myself, when we're looking at somebody, we're seeing into their eyes, into their soul, and all the way to the sun, because we're seeing their spiritual potential, their spirit self, life spirit, spirit human. And as you see their higher thinking, feeling, and willing, which is imagination, inspiration, intuition, you are literally seeing into the future, but you're also seeing all the way to the sun. And so these things are not theories of Rudolf Steiner. Nothing in Steiner is a theory, ever. He gives you an experience, and that's why it's so difficult to study Steiner and why we are creating all these books, so people have accessibility to anthroposophy. But if you study Steiner, he will characterize it so that you have to go into what he's saying, create images of it, create emotions, because he connects everything to real life, connect emotions, and then it upsets your willpower. Why? Because you're not doing what he said you should be doing if you really are part of ascension or part of the real spiritual path, unless you're just a pure soul. If you're a pure soul, God bless you, Goddess bless you. That's all you need. But if you're like John and I, we bang our heads against the wall until I was begging Tyler, please find me Prokofiev's book on forgiveness, because I know there's something in there I need to know before I speak today, or else I will just look like a total fool. And so I had looked for days for this. She goes, pulls it right out. and says, well, this is the part you want, opens up the chapter and says, no, here, just read this. She'd underlined it. It was her book. And I read it. I go, oh, yeah, that's what I'd forgotten. Memory is the gift of Christ. So that's reincarnation. That's the Lord of Karma. That's everything you do is remembered by the Akashic records. But on the other hand, we are really pathetic little creatures who don't really deserve the love that can flow through us, because why? We refuse to forgive. What is forgiveness? It's not, it's a form of higher spiritual conscious forgiving. Humans can forget, like the saying, humans forget, only God can forgive. Well, we forget because of memory, but we really never forgive. And so the first step that we need to have is to forgive ourselves for the fact that we didn't know this about our maker. We didn't know this, that the model we're supposed to be following is the template of the greater I am, because we never knew all the details that Steiner, the greatest clairvoyant of our times and in the future, just like Thomas Aquinas was considered to be the accepted doctrine of the Catholic Church, in the future, we'll all be experiencing these things. And what will happen? What Steiner said is happening to initiates right now. So in the future, all this is going to happen to people. So they don't have to strive to see Christ in his second coming in the etheric realm. In the future, they just simply will see it.
Yes. Well, I mean, the name of Thomas Aquinas was Dr. Angelicus. And the most quoted source within the Summa Theologium is the works of Dionysius, the Areopagite, and his works on the celestial hierarchies. We're currently working on that particular study right now. But in relation to this particular volume, the Second Coming of Christ, you have to keep in mind at the end of his life, St. Thomas Aquinas said his writings were all mere straw. And so you have to be able to step back from the world of appearances and allow things to express as it is in real time. It's like years ago, I met Rasan Nolan Kirk, the jazz musician at Baker's Keyboard Lounge, and he used to say, bright moments, bright moments. And I saw an interview of the virtuoso keyboard and violin. She's a virtuoso on violin and on keyboard, Julia Fisher. And she said that when she plays this music, from the masters, that she feels like and I'm characterizing, but it's like it's a visitation from the music. And so you have to be able to allow yourself to contextualize things on a macrocosmic level as much as you can, to allow to expand from just your abstract mind. And like what Douglas is saying, take the characterizations of Rudolf Steiner and then bring it into the realm of mental pictures, and then see how it all sorts out. And you can start connecting one lecture with another lecture, and it gives you a different vantage point. But in the final analysis, when I started out, it was extremely hard for me to come across the works of Rudolf Steiner, but I had a couple slender little booklets that they used to have that I started out with, the etherization of the blood and the reappearance, or I had the reappearance of the Christ, and then there was one on the work of the angels in man's astral body. And so I would read them over and over again. And I still to this day, if I go back and reread them, it's as if I'd never read them before, right? And of course, they've stayed the same, but I have changed, see? And so as you increase the content that you can bring to the table, you can expand your understanding of these things. But with Douglas saying that the great I am, and the little I am. That's like when Rudolf Steiner refers to the macrocosmic each and the microcosmic each. And he uses the German word each for the I, which of course was coined by Vophilus, the first Christian initiate to go up into Northern Europe and bring Christianity. And he created that word when he was translating the Bible and supervising others to help him do it. And he had to create this word, and it's made from the initials of Jesus Christ, each. And so that's the term that we're referring to. And that's the I am that with Moses, it was an experience that happened in his environment. But with the mystery of Christ, it's become an internalized process of metamorphosis.
Yes, so true. And in the old days, we, during the Jesus Restoration movement, or Pentecostalism, started in my hometown, Springfield, Missouri. Matter of fact, I was there when it started. And very, Christians who want to have a direct experience of Christ. That's what it was all about. But we were hippies, so we had a coffee house and music, and we thought that we should do exactly what the Bible said and believe it literally. We should go out and pray to raise the dead, that we should heal the sick, that we should do all these miraculous things. So many of us worked, and what were we working for? When we said goodbye to each other, we always said one magic word: Maranatha. Christ is coming, or, oh Lord, send Christ, or, there are many ways to translate it. But essentially it means right now. We want the second coming right now. Matter of fact, we would sometimes get really worked up about that. Come on, God, we're ready. We're your harvest. We're ready to go to the wine press, whatever. So we believe these things, right? And then we had a prayer room going 24 hours a day. And the most common thing in those days was someone would come in, and I probably told this story before, and they would say, I just met Jesus. He told me to come here. Where am I? The guy's still tripping on acid, right? Or he just overdosed on acid, but somehow made his way to the coffee house, made it to knocking on our prayer room door, and came in, and we would pray for these people, right? And then they'd describe their experience, and you'd go, man, I wish I could have that experience. That's the white light poured in, and then the pure love flowed in, and then Christ surrounded them, and Christ was so big they had to drop to the ground, just exactly like happened to Saul on the road to Damascus, who then became Paul. He had what Steiner calls the Damascus Event. So these people would have the Damascus Event, and we're like, oh man, we're so jealous, Everyone is like, please give me that experience, and then I can die. I'm happy after that. I cannot tell you how many times this happened. The people, we really did believe that we were there to save these overdosing people, because none of us did drugs, didn't even know what drugs were, didn't even know what their experience is about. But we would pray, we put them in the middle, we'd pray for them, and they'd come out of it, and then they would become Christians. And every single case, everyone who had that experience became one of our most devoted people in this coffee house, but it was much more extensive than a coffee house. But because these churches were all spirit-filled, they called them. So people want a direct experience, and that's what we've been saying before. If you don't experience Christ while you're in the physical, in other words, if you don't rise up out of your physical, because there's no real history. They always try to keep printing Pontius Pilate's letter that refers to Jesus, or that crazy zealot Nazarene, and other document. There's nothing left of Jesus physically, Jesus of Nazareth, who became Jesus Christ and then became Christ Jesus. There's nothing left of that physically, as far as we know, but it doesn't matter. You can have that experience yourself. Why? Because Christ didn't leave. He didn't come to one group of people at one point in history only. He's never left. And he said he'd never leave. And so he keeps reappearing. Well, how does he reappear? Who has explained that in all the theological texts I've ever studied? No one, except Rudolf Steiner. So and that's different than at Pentecost, the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, really the Spirit of wisdom who works with the Spirit of Sophia. That's different than what Christ does when Christ comes walking into the room to heal someone. And I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and said, I came to this church where I was at, and I was going to kill myself, and Christ walked into the room and put his hand on my head and told me to go to a certain church. I didn't know you guys existed. Why am I here? That's what happened to Saul. He fell down, the bright light came, it rolled up on him. He heard a voice, and then he was struck, basically deaf and dumb and blind practically by the experience. And so he had to be taught by somebody else what had just happened to him. Fortunately, Paul, or Saul, had already been initiated into two different forms of initiation. And he believed what we put in this book, The Second Coming of Christ in the Etheric Realm, that everything before the time of Christ and the mystery of Golgotha, if you were clairvoyant, whether the old way, natural clairvoyance, or if you were inspired or you had a vision or an angel work through you, or whatever your reason is to see the spiritual world, what would you see? Christ coming from the sun to the earth in all the different stages. Now, we're going to explain, I think, if I get to this point, which is, I don't know that I can explain this to anyone, but when I spoke before about Christ coming down and making gifts to us before he ever incarnated. So Christ was active long before, and he's active until the end of time, until we evolve into what we're supposed to be, which is a Christ-and being. And instead of being a group soul where the ego is just beginning to be born, and there's not even free thinking until very much later in evolution, human evolution. But what we're going to be in the end is going to be another Christ and being, but we're going to be in a group soul, a Christ and group soul of human individuals that are a replica, a mimic of the template, the engram, the paradigm of what the greater I am is. So when we give up our little selfish I am and we go into our higher three I ams, we basically align with Christ. And all we are doing really is taking upon his perfected vehicles when we are worthy enough to have that same resonance, that same exact experience. So when we're talking about this being that helped Christ, I think I'll get into that later. Let's just focus now on the fact that when we talk about the second coming, in the old days, people will they will argue with each other till their dying breath about the fact that the second coming is happening. There's going to be a rapture. There isn't going to be a rapture. It's going to happen. Christ is going to return from east to west in the crowd. 1,000 versions of this. But one thing I can tell you for sure is one of the most impactful things that we have delivered in the work that John and I have done in these videos and in books that we've done and so on and so forth, is people have come and thanked, particularly, I've sat at dinner with people who have said, thank you. I'm a Christian. I'm a fundamental Christian, and I'm sick and tired of waiting for rapture. I didn't know that the second coming happens as soon as the person is prepared for it. Either at night when you go to sleep, through initiation, through a Christian revelation, through your second birth, knowing Christ, through dying, or through the what is called the event of what Steiner calls the Damascus Event. In other words, you see Christ living in the etheric realm, because Christ only came once in the physical realm. Now Christ is redeeming the etheric realm. And the earth, as everyone knows, and the scientists predict, is nothing but an entropic clock winding down to death. True, until the mystery of Golgotha. Now the physical world has been redeemed and renewed through Christ's resurrection, ascension, and his staying here, surrounding the earth with a super etheric field that all of us go through, whether we like it or not. We go through it when we sleep. We go through it when we die. We go through it when we do our meditation, our prayer. When you are praying to Christ, you are going into the etheric realm. So you don't have to have the cosmology that John and I are so obsessed with for the last, 40, 50 years, and trying to get the exact details of this. Why? Because I was certain, and now I know it's true. After all these years, 50 years of studying this, reading it the 20th time and finally understanding the ramifications of what is being said by Rudolf Steiner is overwhelming. But at the same time, it teaches you what he says, one thing: the absolute, total, and complete fulfillment of love throughout the entire cosmos by Christ. Everything, including the galaxies, everything, the sun, the planets, everything is the love of Christ. So Christ gave us one law: to love. And we're supposed to follow his template. Our small eye is supposed to become the great eye, or our version of the great eye. And that's all we have to do. So we don't need to really know the historicity, the physicality of Christ. Christ is still appearing in the etheric realm. Now, here's the big problem. And it's the problem of everybody who wants to have the experience of the second coming of Christ. Most of them want to do it without any work. They just want the grace of the Lord to come down from the heavens and take them up there. They don't know why. They don't know if they've done anything good. And that doesn't matter, because it's not, the theologians, it's not by works. It's by this. It's by the grace. It's by, the explanations go on ad infinitum. That's not the reality. The reality is what is completely spiritually logical and spiritually economic, which is we're all following our own version of the same path. And if you do not, as a clairvoyant, my test of clairvoyance throughout my whole life, always, since I was first remember testing people, probably at age 12, I would say, "Where's Christ now?" And their answer would tell me everything, because I'd look at their body. And if I didn't see the love of Christ pouring into their body and taming their crazy dragon-like astral body and getting into their etheric body, which the only way you're going to experience Christ is if you have rituals in your life that worship, that revere, that stand in wonder and awe and in thankfulness and gratitude of the Christ. Now, you can say it's the Trinity, Father God, Son God, Holy Spirit. That's true too, but we in our little humanness right now can't understand all that. We can explain it, though. We can explain the cosmology of it. I can tell you the exact time that it happened in cosmogenesis and which of the hierarchies did what, and then what happened to them before and after, according to Rudolf Steiner. But that doesn't do you any good. You need to know what is going to be directly relatable to your life. And so it always goes back to the heart, the pure heart. It always goes back to the same phrase we always say, which is Christ on the throne of your heart? Or have you placed Lucifer there? Have you placed Ahriman, Satan, there? Or are you just a dimwit who is unconsciously allowing your bad habits to enter your physical body, your etheric body, control your astral body of desires? So all you're doing is fulfilling your desires all the time like an animal. And you don't have an objective thinking that says, wait a second, I can control my astral body. I can control my desires. I can perfect them like a saint. I'm going to perfect them like Saint Francis, who got the astral body, a part of the astral body, perfected body of Christ. But in the rest of his life, he was a flake. So you can absorb parts of the divine without absorbing all parts. And so nobody, if you're an angel, well, then, you're going to be doing angel work. But if you're still a human, you're going to be trying to take on this template, this paradigm, this engram, this complete story of the biography of Christ, from the great I am to creating the small I am, and then leading the small I am back to where the great I am came from. That's what Christ said. I go ahead before you to prepare the way. There are many mansions in my Father's house. If you take the words of Christ with the mystery wisdom that Rudolf Steiner reveals, which would have been revealed, by the way, if you had a pure heart. If you read the Bible with a pure heart, even when you come to those incongruencies or difficulties, read it with a pure heart and know that, it might be a mistranslation, but the point is Christ's intent is there, but it's not just in a book. It's in the book of life. It's in the Akashic records. And really, no place is thicker with the Akashic records than in this realm of spiritual economy, the super etheric realm, the realm that Steiner calls Shamballa. And when he called it Shamballa, the first time I read this, it almost blew my mind. And we're going to talk a little bit later about Krishna and Buddha and Zarathustra. And I'm going, I'm a Christian, Steiner. What are you doing? That's Persian. That's ancient India. What? From Atlantis? You're going to tell me about the way that an archai incarnated through the Manu and Atlantis? What does that have to do with my direct experience of Christ? Because in all of my religious studies, it's only one thing I'm after: a direct experience of the spiritual world that is unencumbered by my own selfishness and impurities. But at the same time, because, John and I are really mentalists, I need to have a good philosophical, logical, almost common sense, a universal common sense picture that backs up these things, or else I'm not going to go for it. I'm not going to willingly suspend my disbelief to say, I have faith in some crazy idea that some preacher just told from the pulpit. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have a direct experience myself. And that's the beauty of what Steiner says. Don't believe a word he says. He tells you this. Under no circumstances, he says, ever receive anything I say with faith. No, you must try this against your own spiritual development. And because I was born clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, I've been trying this since the first moment that I could read, which was kind of late in life, and or speak to people, which is also late in life. But the point is that I will never stop studying this. Why? Because it's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that matters is your I am and the other. Now, the other can be a human or it can be the world. If it's the world, it's really Christ. Or as the ancient Indians said, there's the Atman inside of you, the Brahman outside of you, and they are one and the same. So my most favorite prayer, which is one of the greatest things you can learn to do, is do the eternal prayer or the continuous prayer. You take a certain phrase, not I, but Christ in me. And you sit down for a couple of weeks and you say that over and over, and you think of every single thing that comes to your mind of what that means. And now, if I did that and I really did conceive in my mind everything that I know about not I, but Christ in me, my brain would explode. But the point is that as you are doing that, then pretty soon you keep saying it, and then you take it into your sleep, and pretty soon you're saying it in your dreams. And then in the morning you wake up and you're still saying it, and it's not you saying it anymore. That's eternal prayer.
Yeah. The thing is that, first off, I like to give a safety disclaimer. I recommended listening to Rudolf Steiner's lectures on YouTube on many occasions, but don't do it while you're driving, okay? Because you may translate into a spiritual or level of soul that is not conducive to operating an automobile, just so that's clear. Now, in coming to understand these things, you have to realize that it's a participation. And the key to your participation is to be able to have the faculty of reverence. And if you can maintain that humble gratitude and reverence before the mystery of Christ, then that you're in good stead to be on your way to having an experience. And Rudolf Steiner is very clear. He says that you have the wisdom, beauty, and strength are the three pillars of the temple. It's like the three pillars in the Kabbalah. But you have the wisdom, and Steiner says that it's not Christ we lack, it's the wisdom of Christ, that we don't understand these things. And then there's the strength, and that's to have the will to be able to act from that wisdom. But the thing that Rudolf Steiner pointed out that people frequently left out in their self-education is the beauty aspect. And that's the artistic or the creative aspect. That's to be able to manifest in the world things of beauty that the path of the spirit of freedom and love is beautiful. That you're out there and you're trying to make things better. You're trying to make things more harmonious. You're trying to bring a coherence. And if you can be a coherent influence to others around you, it's contagious, really. There's people, when I worked in the store all the years, it was the largest esoteric bookstore. And after I left, Douglas took my place. But people would come in there, and you could see the reason they were coming there was to connect to their coherence, that they wanted to get centered. And if you're centered, then, and if you have your shield of God, the armor of God that you receive from being in that reverent state, that it provides you with a way of getting through most anything. And so we frequently share that Michaelic verse that we printed in the books, and we try to put it all over the place, because really what it amounts to is just take it easy. It's all going to work out if you're on the path that leads to the temple of Sophia, that's in celebration of the mysteries of Christ. That is the Grail mystery in a nutshell. And so being able to know that gives you a certain confidence in facing the world, because well, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to screw up, you can do some really big screw ups, but you're on the right path, and you have that conviction that gives you that coherence and that centering, and that becomes contagious amongst your friends, rather than just running around. So many people, you see them, they're running around, they're living in fear. And what is science? Science is an expression of that fear, that attempt to try and nail down, why is all this stuff happening? They come up with all these theories, and they have to revise them every year. But they're the final answer, but it changes every year. So the final answer changes every year. You'll find in the mysteries of Christ that it doesn't change, it metamorphoses. It goes through a transformation. And of course, the transformation that takes place is the transformation that you're going through as a result of contemplating these things. And I realize a lot of people don't have the time, but Rudolf Steiner said that the Rosicrucian mysteries were based on meditating on the first 14 verses in the Gospel of John. And so if you could at least set aside a little time to do that, and say grace before your meals, and try to have a self-awareness, self-reference as you go into sleep at night, you'll be all right.
It's true. And so many people worry all the time with fear and anxiety. And that's why we are motivated to make these books, so that once you have the wisdom in your mind, you can relax. Now, there are many people who have come to anthroposophy, and I say this sadly in a way, and they use Rudolf Steiner, as John was giving the warning, don't read this, don't listen to the tapes while you're driving. You might drive off the road. There have been many times that people have come to me and said, okay, here's the problem I'm having. I start reading Steiner and I pop out of my body. I just leave. And then they think that they really, and then they describe it, they went through the heart, and then they went through the head, and the silver cord holds them. And then they come back. I'm going, well, those are all real experiences. But now here's the problem. You're half crazy. And then you went to read Steiner, and Steiner separates your astral body from your etheric body as part of initiation. So as you're reading these things, if you take them to heart, they will cause you to have initiation experiences, but you haven't tamed the dragon in you. And unfortunately, many of these people, I should define that, some of these people ended up in the psych ward. And, I'd go and I'd visit them. These were people who came and studied anthroposophy, okay? And they ended up in a psych ward. Well, they were halfway there before they got to anthroposophy. And then they'd stay up all night long reading Rudolf Steiner. And there are parts of Rudolf Steiner, like John mentioned, 2 books. If you just had those 2 books and you read them over and over again, you would have the capacity to transcend into what Steiner is telling you is an experience of the higher worlds, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Or if you read The Realm of Spiritual Economy, or if you read The Pre-Earthly Deeds of Christ. These are little teensy tiny books, okay? Or how the angel works in the human astral body. Or these things, once you read them, if you can cognize them, you go into what's called supersensible perception. You can't conceive these things with material thinking because they're not material.
You have to be able to think like an angel.
Precisely. And feel like an archangel and have a willpower that is fired by the archai. And now anyone can do that. Sometimes they only do it for a flash second. Sometimes they, I know, I have seen people literally looking at them clairvoyantly, and they've never had an objective thought in their life. They're an automaton. And sometimes that kills their spirit because their soul has been completely made into a materialistic automaton. So at the same time, though, if you understand what Steiner is saying, and many times, matter of fact, you see this on Facebook all the time, the best quotes on Facebook are little tiny quotes of Steiner, because they'll start off real nice and la, 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 and you'll say, yes, I relate to that. And I relate to that. Oh, my Lord, what did he just say? And then you'll have to read it 20 times and you go, oh, if that's true, then these 10,000 things are also true. Yes, that is the way that it works. I've said this many times, but when you meet an angel, if you thought you met an angel and the angel was alone, you met the devil. That ain't no angel. All angels are connected to other angels. And they're connected, the higher angels are connected to the archangels, and they're connected to the and it goes right up. And so when you look, which you can't look, but if you use all 12 senses and your spiritual senses and supersensible organs, and you see an angel, which I used to see all the time. I can't hardly remember going to church and seeing the Eucharist without, at least for a moment, seeing an angel come flying in for a second, right? So when you see an angel, you will think you've seen God. You will be 100%, because if it's the first time it's happened, you will think you've seen God. But at the same time, when you actually truly cognize, comprehend, and you can only comprehend Steiner not with your thinking, it has to be with your feeling and your willing. Your will has to rise up through feeling into your thinking to cognize what he's saying. But when you do, you are witnessing an angel. Those are archetypal beings. Angels create archetypes in the realm, specifically in the realm of the spirit self, but you could also say in the transformed astral body. You could, when you say anything in Steiner, if you have enough Steiner scholars sitting around, and there's 12 of us, every one of us could give a different name Steiner gave for that concept, and we would all be correct. Now, how do you nitpick as a theologist with people who sit around and say, no, oh, you mean here's 20 names for that realm, and each one of them has an explanation that is so complicated. And that's what I've been coming across lately. And it's oftentimes in the quotes we put in the book, where Steiner says, reality is extraordinarily complex. But at the same time, because of spiritual economy, if you see the real workings, it's rather simple, but only simple for the pure of heart. For those of us bound by materialistic thinking, earthbound thinking, shadow gray thought thinking, computer thinking, the spider network of Ahriman artificial intelligence thinking, yeah, that's not going to get you anywhere except down. We want to go up, folks. Matter of fact, there's a phrase I just came across. Let's see if I can remember it. Oh God, how fabulous those wings unused that are folded in the heart. Christopher Fry said that. It's like one of the two great things he ever said. But anyway, we have wings in our heart. Who's going to open them? And when you do, guess what? You fly. And so you fly. The Greek philosophers said, you take wing and you fly into the realm of the archetypes. Different words, same experience.
Well, yeah, the physicist Christopher Hitchens, he said the philosophy of freedom that Rudolf Steiner wrote the philosophy of spiritual activity is sometimes published as. He said, that's the greatest book of the 20th century. But what is all that other stuff? See, so I realize this is not for everybody. But for those of you that have a background in science, I'd recommend going to the philosophy of freedom, the philosophy of spiritual activity, where he takes and deconstructs what is thinking. And once you get to the point to where he deconstructs it so that you have an understanding that that's where you are. That's the place to be, because that's where you're free. See? And the key is being developing into a spirit of freedom and love. Well, you can't manifest love unless you have freedom. Really. Because is it love if it's like this just involuntary event? No, of course not. It's that you've made a decision to come on board to become a Christophorus.
Thank you so much, John. We're going to continue this conversation soon and go into even more aspects concerning the second coming of Christ in the etheric realm. Thank you.